To order. Apologies have been received from Senator Maria Byrne, and I propose that we commence this meeting in public session for the committee's engagement with Minister McHugh in relation to the interim report on reduced timetables. We will agree housekeeping matters in the private session afterwards. Is that agreed? Agreed. Gavan Magad. Can I remind members and witnesses, please, to turn off your mobile phones, to switch them to flight mode. Mobile phones, as we know, interfere with the sound system and they make it difficult for the parliamentary reporters to report the meeting, and also television coverage and web streaming will be adversely affected. So we've reached item number 1 on the agenda, engagement with the Minister on the interim report on reduced timetables. And on behalf of the committee, I wish to welcome the Minister for Education and Skills, Mr Joe McHugh, to the meeting. Earlier this year, Minister, this committee shone a light on a very worrying practice which really was hidden in plain sight for a long period of time. And that's in relation to the area of reduced timetables. We had 3 different stakeholder sessions, and indeed some of the evidence that was unveiled during that period of time was quite shocking and quite appalling, to be perfectly honest. And while members of the committee welcome your announcement yesterday that schools will now be required to give formal notification of the use of reduced timetables to TUSLA, and that was one of the recommendations that we made in the interim report, we will be seeking further information, obviously, on this announcement and the proposed guidelines for notifications. It was quite ironic that that was released yesterday, when in fact we were having this upcoming engagement today, but we take it in the spirit which we hope it was intended. So I propose that I understand, Minister, that you have to attend in the Dáil for 2 topical issues and that your time is right. So can I ask the members and the Minister, please, to be very focused in your questions and answers throughout the engagement that we have. The format of the meeting is that I will invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement, which will be followed by engagement with the members of the committee. And, Minister, as you are aware, the committee will be publishing your opening statement on our website following the meeting. Before we begin, I want to remind the members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that you should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I'd now like to invite the Minister to make your opening statement.
Chair, I would like to thank the committee for the invitation and for affording me the opportunity to speak here today on the issue of reduced timetables. I would also like to thank the representative bodies who presented on this issue at the previous hearing for their input and their contributions. The basic aim of this government is to use our economic success to build a fair and compassionate society. Equality of opportunity is at the heart of our vision. As I have stated on many previous occasions, and I want to reiterate it here today, each and every child has a right to education to enable them to live a full life and to realise his or her potential. I have already made clear my position is that all pupils who are enrolled in a school should attend school for the full day, unless exempted from doing so for exceptional circumstances. Reduced timetables are not in any way a standard aspect of a child's experience of school and must not be allowed to become such. They are exceptional measures. While in some circumstances it may be necessary to use a reduced timetable, for example, as a means of assisting the reintegration of a pupil to a school routine, such arrangements should only be put in place in limited and time-bound circumstances. Officials at my department have been working closely with officials from the Department of Children and Youth Affairs and TUSLA, which is under the remit of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, concerning monitoring and reporting of this practice to address the issues raised in the interim report from the committee. A set of guidelines has been prepared jointly by my own department, working with the Department of Children and Youth Affairs and TUSLA. The purpose of these guidelines is to provide clarity to school authorities and parents or guardians around the reporting of reduced timetables in schools, to ensure that the use of reduced timetables is limited to only those circumstances where it is absolutely necessary, and that where in the rare circumstances such usage occurs, schools follow best practice with the interests of the student to the fore. As is normal practice, prior to finalising the guidelines, my department, Minister Zabone's Department of Children and Youth Affairs in Tusla, are arranging for a consultation process with education stakeholders, including school management bodies. Provision of supports is critical, and I want to highlight the investment that this government is making. This year's education budget is €10.8 billion. This highlights the government's strong belief in and commitment to the power of education. Nearly €1 in every 5 of this year's budget, about €1.9 billion, is invested in supporting children with special educational needs, including those with challenging behaviour in schools. This is the highest ever level of government expenditure on special education. This provides for a continuum of special educational provision to be made available for children with special educational needs, including those with challenging behaviours, so that regardless of the level of need of the child, educational provision can be made for them. The number of special education teachers has increased by 37%, from 9,740 in 2011 to over 13,400. The number of special needs assistants has risen by 51%, from 10,575 in 2011 to 15,950 at present. Schools can now allocate additional teaching support to a child whose challenging behaviour is having a significant impact on their ability to learn in school. Children do not need a special education needs diagnosis to access these supports, and parents or guardians will no longer be required to get their child such a diagnosis. Schools may also access SNA support for children with additional care needs, including challenging behaviour. All schools can access in-school support and CPD from the NCSE to assist their teachers in working with children who display challenging behaviour. The number of specialist placements for children with complex special educational needs has also been significantly increased by this government. Over 1,050 additional special placements have been provided for the new school year. There are now 1,621 special classes compared to 548 in 2011, including 1,355 special classes catered for children with autism. 125 special schools, including a new special school established this year, also provide specialist education for students with complex special educational needs. These schools now provide over 8,000 places compared to 6,848 in 2011. I note the committee questioned whether SNA support is the most appropriate support to a child's challenging behaviour. As you know, the view of the Department and the NCSE is that students need the right support from the right person at the right time to achieve the full potential. To this end, a preschool and in-school therapy demonstration project has been undertaken in 75 preschools and 75 schools to provide in-school therapeutic support for students. In addition, €4.75 million was allocated in Budget 2019 for the trialling of a new school inclusion model of support to include in-school provision of behavioural practitioners, psychologists and regional support teams to build capacity in schools to meet the needs of their students. The outcome of this pilot will inform the future policy and service provision, including the provision of behaviour support. The National Educational Psychology Service, otherwise known as NEPS, work with both primary and post-primary schools and are concerned with learning, behaviour, social and emotional development. This government has recognised the valuable input of the National Educational Psychological Service for pupils in schools, and over the lifetime of this government has increased psychologist numbers from a sanctioned level of 173 whole-time equivalent in 2015 to a current 204 whole-time posts, with a commensurate increase in investment from €18 million to €20.75 million per annum in the period. There are currently 190 posts in the system, with recruitment of some 14 new posts and vacancies currently underway. Supports are also provided to JESH schools at an overall cost of €125 million to 801 schools serving approximately 190,000 pupils to improve attendance, retention and school participation. Enhanced capitation for traveller children in the system is provided at a cost of €1.1 million. Actions are also being progressed under the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy to improve educational outcomes for travellers, including a pilot project to target school attendance, retention and participation commencing this September. Additional supports have been provided to support this pilot in the form of homeschool community liaison officers funded by my department, in addition to traveller education workers funded by the Department of Justice and Equality and educational welfare officers employed by TUSLA. In summary, In relation to reduced timetables, I anticipate that the guidelines and the notification system will allow us to monitor the use of reduced timetables and ultimately address the issues raised. If parents have concerns about the use by a school or a reduced timetable for their child, they can contact their local educational welfare officer, who has statutory responsibility for ensuring that the rights of the child to an education are upheld, and will advise them on the most appropriate type of action. My department will continue to work closely with Tuesday Educational Welfare Service and with the NCSE to ensure that, where in the very limited number of cases a reduced timetable is deemed necessary, such measures will be used for only time-limited periods. I would like to thank the committee again, Chairperson, for highlighting this issue. I'm aware that this is an interim report, so you're going to be working on new proposals and suggestions in the not too distant future. Look forward to working with you and hearing from you in that regard. And I would like to thank the groups and individuals that have contributed. And as a government, we have demonstrated and will continue to work to realise our commitment to ensuring that all of our children receive the fullest education possible. And just in conclusion, I'm also very, very conscious that there are challenges out there, and there are parents and children that are facing these challenges, and that's not been lost on me either. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'm now going to go to the members in order as how they indicated. So, Deputy Byrne.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Minister and officials, for the presentation today. I am glad that the various charities such as I Am and the travel organisations highlighted this issue to this committee, and that we really put a spotlight on this issue back at the start of the summer, because as I described it at that committee, this particular practice is a national scandal and has to end, and I think that everybody around this table would be in agreement. I have to say, I think that what the department says in replies to parliamentary questions is exactly correct. The practice is different, and I hate to say it, but the guidelines differ from that. The guidelines open the whole thing up, and that certainly won't be acceptable to Fianna Fáil. We must start with the premise that every child has a legal right to education. We cannot start with the premise that this is allowed if you follow procedures, which is what I worry will happen here. The Minister mentions challenging behaviour on quite a number of occasions in his speech. Now, challenging behaviour, actually, we don't have evidence at this committee that that's actually the primary reason. In fact, we don't really have much evidence at all about reduced timetables, but we certainly don't have evidence that challenging behaviour is the reason for it. It shouldn't be, because the department says in replies to PQs that it can only be done for medical reasons. Reduced timetables can only be in place for medical reasons. So I'm not sure where the challenging behaviour comes from. Challenging behaviour can be dealt with in many other areas. It also doesn't address the issue of travellers being disproportionately affected as well by reduced timetables. The other point, and I've been criticised by some teachers, it has to be said, for highlighting this issue, and they say that they operate under difficult circumstances, and I have no doubt about that in some cases. I have absolutely no doubt that many of them do. But I think we all have a role to play in the education system, whether it's policymakers, whether it's minister, whether it's teachers, whether it's, and to ensure that each child's right to education is actually upheld and implemented, and that won't always be straightforward. So I would worry about anything that the Minister proposes that goes away from the words of the Department in replies to PQs before now, about those exceptional cases where it's a return to school after medical or similar reasons under professional advice. Anything else, I think, is wrong. I think the representative from Tusla here at the last meeting was absolutely excellent, and I was delighted that he was very, very clear that where this is done not in accordance with that it is a suspension or expulsion. I don't think that's mentioned at all in terms of the information that would be required to be given to parents. So I think we have to take a really hard line on this if we're going to take seriously the issue and the needs of our children and their rights to have an education. I think this committee has blown this up, and I think schools need to get the message as well that this isn't the way. This is not a way to deal with disciplinary issues, which actually the premise of the Minister's speech today is almost that this is a disciplinary issue. It cannot be. It is, like, under the law, as you have set out in replies to Dáil questions, Minister, disciplinary issues don't come into this at all. They shouldn't. As a matter of law, I would read into your reply. So I don't know why challenging behaviour has been mentioned, unless, of course, it's a medical issue, which you have a look, but it doesn't seem to me. The Minister mentioned the special school established this year. Can the Minister confirm that school has opened yet, and if not, when is it going to open? And they're the issues. Just to say that I'm not entirely satisfied. I am glad that there is action happening. I think schools will probably need. It does need a change of mindset, actually, because just even for parents, and I have to say, even for some of the advocacy organisations and all the good work they do, I still don't think. I think some of them seem to think that this could be possible in even broader circumstances than what the Minister outlined, as long as it was guidelines and all that. I actually take a much harder line. I don't think it should be possible at all, except for the real medical issues that the Minister has mentioned in replies to all questions before. And that if there's an issue, if schools can't cope or can't deal with children with special needs, then clearly the resourcing or the training is not there. And that's then up to policymakers and the government in particular to make sure those resources and training are there, so that all these children. The bottom line is each and every child in this country is entitled to an education, and there's no ifs or buts. And I'm just afraid that this document here brings in a lot of ifs and buts, and doesn't address a number of the recommendations that we made earlier in the summer. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Byrne. Deputy Martin.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not convinced that the guidelines that you released to the media yesterday ahead of the meeting here today will ensure that the use of reduced timetables is the exception rather than the norm. And I welcome your statement today, Minister, but when you do look at it, it's 7 pages long, and 3 very small paragraphs on the last page deal with reduced timetables. I feel, unfortunately, the rest is a little bit of patting yourselves on the back. Aren't we great in the Department of Education? This is what we're doing, but not actually tackling the issue that is here. But dealing with what we have here, I do notice in the form itself, would you consider requiring a school to document what other measures were undertaken to deal with the situation before a child is placed on a reduced timetable? Now, I know it says there in the form what supports have the school sought, but I think we need to know before this is even considered by school, outline exactly what has been done by the school. I'm just wondering as well, Minister, who has the right to say no or stop? We don't want this. And what happens when the parent says, no, I don't want? What's the guideline for the school then? What monitoring or requirement for reporting will take place during the time a child is placed on reduced timetable? At the end of each plan, is there a requirement to notify all parties concerned as to how progress has gone, regardless of whether or not they're trying to renew it? But I think even renewing it is bizarre. So basically, is there a requirement for progress reporting to be done and how reduced timetable is working or not working? According to the guidelines here, the NCSE must be notified when a reduced timetable is agreed for a student with special education needs. I'm just wondering, Minister, do you intend to include or specify any further role, or is it just the NCSE have to be notified, or the CNO, and that's it, full stop? Like, what exactly is the role of the EWO or the CNO in relation to this, and especially when it comes to renewals? In relation to Guideline K, must only consider an extension in exceptional circumstances and only with further written consent of parents. I think maybe, exceptional circumstances for the renewal. I think it should be very clear at the very top there that it should only be considered an exceptional. That should be A. Now, again, you have it here. When might a reduced timetable be used? But I think it should start here in the key requirements. This is only to be used in exceptionals. Just again to reiterate that to the school if they're considering it. And would you consider making it a requirement not only to consult the parents or get the written consent of the parents, but also to, at the very least, have consultation with NEPs or whatever outside disability service provider is relevant to the child in question? I know that was something that was, I'm sure you read at the Inclusion Ireland Education Behaviour and Exclusion report. That's something that they were seeking, and I think it's something that should be done. Do you intend to put to put a hard limit on the use of reduced timetables. 6 weeks, as outlined here, is given as a guideline, and I think the word ideally is used. I think that's really ideally is not the word that should be used here, because that leaves a lot of scope for abuse again. So I'd prefer to see a hard limit. I think 6 weeks is an extraordinary long time for a student to be removed from school, to be on a reduced timetable, to be isolated socially from their peers. Maybe look at that again. I noticed on the timetable or in the form, it may be an oversight, but there's no reference to gender being specified, just when it comes to gathering data. I see ethnicities there, but not gender. Is there a particular reason that that's been left out? What assurances can we be given that the teachers placed with these students have been given the robust training that they need? It can't be, Minister, a case of the short straw. You're on because you happen to be free, so you're going to the reduced timetable. That is not fair to the student, to the parent or the teacher. It's a disservice to all involved. And how do they decide, what guidance are given to the school as to what subjects the student will have access to? See, these are all the reasons. When you start probing into, Minister, the reduced timetable, you know, we're talking about what teachers will they be qualified, what subjects. It's very problematic. And Deputy Byrne referred to challenging behaviour. Again, there's no definition of challenging behaviour. This is the ongoing issue across the world with departments of education. So then it leads to abuse of the term, you know, of using challenging behaviour. And then it's the training in challenging behaviour and the resourcing of teachers and staff and schools and principals when it comes to challenging behaviour. That leads, it's not child-centred, and we put them in when we're trying to support those children, and it's just remove them because of the so-called challenging behaviour that no one can define. I'm just wondering, are you liaising with, or are you intending to liaise with the Minister for Health, Mental Health, to ensure that CAMS and NEPs are properly resourced to provide the necessary assistance? So what interdepartmental communication has taken place since we had this discussed in the Oireachtas Education Committee, so since that summer one, because we must make sure that at-risk children are given the appropriate help. I know one of the recommendations in our interim report is that any guidelines related to the use of reviewed timetables must also outline the complaints process. If a parent is dissatisfied, they must know how they can complain, and a process must be in black and white. Where is that? Because guidelines don't include that, and I think that's something that should be put in place. And of course, at the root of all this is that, you know, why are schools resorting to the use of reduced timetables, and particularly to children with disabilities? You know, again, that inclusion in our report said 1 in 4 children with disability have been placed in a reduced timetable. 1 in 4 children with a disability, and half of those for over 20 days. It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. So how can we ensure that every student with a disability or learning need has access to a properly trained teacher, and how schools will be supported with these issues, and so that they don't have to go to reduced timetables? And finally, I would, in relation to the reporting and monitoring, could I request that you would publish, that there be an annual report if you're going to go ahead with these guidelines? And as I said at the outset, I have a problem with the guidelines because I don't think they're rigid enough. But if you are going to go ahead with that, could we have an annual report on the use of reduced timetables, so everyone can see every year the gender, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, if there's a disability, the length of reduced timetables? I think that's something that we need to see every year. And of course, Minister, when it comes to inspectors, again, I'll say, you know, the schools who are criticised by the inspectors, that question that is asked, and I've been saying this every time I can for the last 3 years since I got elected, you have to ask the inspectors to remove the question as a critique of a school. Why do you ever ask yourself the question, why do you have so many students with special educational needs? When the question should be asked of the school that doesn't. Why do you not have children with special educational needs, and what are you intending to do about it? Because that's at the heart of it. An attitude needs to be changed there too. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy O'Leary.
Paul, Buick Squalish and Arags and Hifigig. So I was Gortron on it. I think this is an issue that anecdotally people would have had some sense of. Unfortunately, very often in relation to the travelling community, there would have been at least a tacit awareness that in many instances they were not getting the full benefit of the school places that they held down. And I think there's great credit due to this committee and also to Inclusion Ireland and the Dublin Technological University for the report. And I think between the committee and the report, I think it has forced action on this issue, because it is the case, unquestionably, that the mechanism that exists was being used. In fact, it was being abused in a way that frustrated these children's ability to gain an education, to gain their full potential. There's no question that the level of the abuse, in terms of some of the examples that were given, the frequency or the time that people were out, is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm glad that there is movement now. There are difficulties, has been outlined in relation to the guidelines. But first of all, I suppose, while it is an interim report, the Minister has, as I understand it, I imagine, had sight of the committee's report. So I'd like to ask you, I suppose, do you accept what's outlined in that document, and do you agree with the recommendations that were made in it? I particularly want to endorse recommendation number 9, which outlines the need for additional psychological supports, and I think there's a need for additional resources by the Minister in the upcoming budget. Just in relation to the timetable specifically, I suppose just at the start, like section 2 says regulations/guidelines, and I'd like to ask, well, which is it? Because I don't think they're the same thing. I don't view a regulation the same as a guideline. I would imagine a regulation having a lot more effect. And that comes to a point there raised by Deputy Martin. Point E there states that ideally the period on which a student is on a reduced timetable should not exceed 6 weeks, and a reduced timetable must not be carried forward from one academic year to the next. And I suppose ideally there allows some wriggle room. And I suppose an issue with the guidelines as a whole is, if a school does not comply with the objectives that have been set out by the department, what's the consequences? What's the sanction? Because I don't see any, and that's a difficulty, because it will always then be open to a school to try and point to extraneous circumstances of why they've had to, I suppose, go beyond what the department has in mind. So how do we avoid that? How do we ensure that schools do not frustrate the intention of the department, and that there is a sanction there if a school is once again using some mechanism that's either through this set of guidelines or any other way to frustrate the department's intention, this committee's intention, and the entitlement of these children to gain a full education. There's also, and I suppose it's a query really in relation to H, there's a requirement to provide appropriate work for the student when not in school and arrange for this to be checked. I suppose instinctively I'm not sure that that's necessarily always appropriate, and maybe some circumstances where it's appropriate, but I can well imagine a situation where that might be the source of conflict or disagreement, or that it might not be appropriate, that it might not in fact aid the reintegration of a student back into the class, which is, very often, or is intended to be the objective of having any kind of flexibility in relation to this. This flexibility has been abused, but the purpose of any kind of flexibility is in relation to that reintegration. So I would have a query as to whether that's appropriate. I suppose I think that's all I have for the minute, but I suppose in general I do think there is no excuse for the fact that some schools were allowing this abuse to happen, but there is also an issue that this very likely would have occurred in schools that were under significant pressure, and I think that has to be acknowledged, and I think additional resources have to be put into those schools, but there is no excuse. There is no excuse for the manner in which it was used, and I think a very robust line needs to be taken to ensure that procedures such as this are not abused in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Minister, and your officials for coming before us. And I just want to first of all agree with others that this is a very important issue that we've shone a light on in this committee. And it was something that really there weren't, there was very little public information in relation to it, and it was really only when parents actually came across it with their own children, that they realised that this was a practice. And actually, I think it originally came to light when we were looking at the transition of traveller children from one level of education to another. And we realised that a very large number of traveller children are actually subjected to reduced timetables, and that there was very little knowledge about it. And one of the pieces of information that struck me in our hearings was from the Community Law and Mediation Group, who had done a study on reduced timetables amongst certain children in Limerick, as it happened, where I represent. And they came up with a statistic that only 27% of education welfare officers actually knew that a child was on reduced timetables. So I think it's absolutely essential, first of all, that that information is conveyed and is known, and that we have very good data collection. This was one of the things that came up again and again and again in the hearings, that there wasn't data, and that's partly because they weren't registered by schools, because they weren't considered to be either suspensions or exclusions. So I do welcome the fact that I understand from you anyway, Minister, and maybe you can clarify it, that there will be a much better, more robust collection of data, but it does absolutely need to be comprehensive. And it does also need to be, shared and continuously updated, so that we know exactly, and that I think it was Deputy Martin said there should be a reporting back to the committee. And I absolutely agree with that we need public reporting of exactly how much this is used, why it is used, and that there's intervention, so that there is an alternative arrangement for those children when it happens, and it should only be exceptional. And the second point I want to make about it only being exceptional is around the issue of parents' consent, not just consent, but I think an equal power relationship between the parents, or at least equal, if not more, towards the parents in terms of all of this. That it shouldn't be just a case of, we have to remove your child from school for a certain amount of time, or possibly they might be suspended, or they might be expelled, or whatever. That there shouldn't be pressure on parents, that it should absolutely be a relationship where the parents are genuinely involved and have the power to say, no, I don't want my child to be taken out of school. Because, as Deputy Byrne says, it is a right. And it was the Ombudsman for Children, I think, referred to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the rights of the child to have an education. So I do think it's really important that that power relationship is changed. And another thing that was striking was that the various representatives of management bodies and so on, when they came in, they more or less agreed with us all that it should only be exceptional, it should be time limited, it should be with the consultation of parents. But yet, the evidence we got from representatives of parents' groups, of people like Exclusion Ireland and As I Am, and the traveller representatives, all had a different story. They had a story about it being used quite widely, and with parents just being phoned up and said, come on in and collect your child, they have to be taken out of school. So it wasn't planned, and it wasn't recorded, and they didn't feel that they had any real power in the decision making at all. So I think it's important that we have shone this light. I think it's really important that we get it right as well. So I hope, Minister, you will take note of all of the submissions that we got. And I know you've just said, and maybe this is a question for you, one question is around the gathering of data, and also the role of the inspectorate to ensure that there is a way in which the inspectors gather the information, and that, as again has been said, that it isn't seen as a negative for a school to be inclusive, but that it's actually seen as a positive, but that the data is gathered. So that's my other question around the gathering of data. And thirdly, you did say, and I understand this very well, that there has to be consultation with the various education partners on any proposals, and you are going to have that consultation. But can you give us an idea of the time frame of how long that consultation will take, and when we will actually have a final situation in place that will be clear, that will be, there will be full information for everybody involved, where the welfare of the child will be paramount, and where there will be there will be alternative supports and educational opportunities for those children where it is agreed that it is in the best interest of the child. But again, I think everybody on the committee and everybody who came before us was very strongly of the view that it should be only in very rare situations, and that it shouldn't be something that schools use as a way of dealing with children whose behaviour they perceive to be difficult.
Thank you, Deputy. Senator Gavan.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. I had a conversation yesterday with a parent who, whose child is 6 years of age and has access to 1 hour of school per day. That's what she's been offered. And when she asked what she should do when she's in difficulty at home, she was advised to contact the Gardaí. Again, I stress a 6-year-old child. I think it's important, Minister, and I do welcome the fact that you're here, and I welcome the statement you've made, but I think it's important that you and your department acknowledge that you failed children, that your department has failed children consistently. And like my colleague, Deputy O'Leary, I want to acknowledge the work of this committee in particular in shining a light on this particular issue. The issue of data collection is absolutely key. It's kind of shocking to acknowledge that we just don't know how many children are affected by reduced timetables. I just want to ask a couple of quick questions, and I'm conscious of time, so I will be quick. Will the department be pursuing an overhaul of its data collection, maintenance and presentation policy? If so, will this include an expansion of proper data management practices to other areas affecting children with special educational needs, such as the provision of ASD special classes in post-primary education? And I do note that in the figures you gave in your presentation, Minister, you didn't highlight the drastic difference in numbers between primary and secondary when it comes to ASD classes. Maybe you might have a comment in relation to that. Very quickly as well, what will the department do to address the lack of specialist training regarding special educational needs for teachers in mainstream schools? And a very specific question, will the department open continuous professional development regarding special educational needs currently available for teachers to special needs assistants who are currently left out of such CPD programmes? And finally, Minister, you'll know the Special Needs Parents Association have recognised the place of home tuition in supporting students who have fallen through the gaps left behind by the department. Is the department going to take any action to expand access to home tuition and home tuition payments for students on reduced timetables? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ruane.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister. I think obviously a huge amount has already been said. I think we need to look as well wider than the reduced timetables, and people have already mentioned in terms of why reduced timetables have become such a norm in so many schools. And I think we need to look at pupil-teacher ratio. We need to look at when we listen to teachers and they're talking about why they're using them. They're talking about the amount of children they're trying to teach within the class, and then so one disruptive kid all of a sudden is a problem that needs to be removed so that they can adequately teach the rest of the class. And maybe there's a huge issue around here around classroom size and the ability of the teacher to be able to work effectively with children. And then also in terms of capitation, because I tell you, if reduced timetables had been a thing when I was in school, based on how they're using them, there would have been very little people in my classroom. So there's something gone wrong, because the schools outside of disability, which is very widespread in terms of across all socio-economic backgrounds, outside of disability and intellectual disability, ASD, everything, it's a socio-economic issue, and the parents that are involved are probably the most vulnerable families that you could meet and work with. So the power balance, no matter how much we write into guidelines, is not there, because you have groups that have had a negative experience of the school education system. You have travellers who daily have a negative experience of the education system. So when we introduce anything, what we need to look at, who effectively is going to advocate for a parent in this situation where they're going to say no to a school. Because the power imbalance, no matter how much we try and balance it out and saying guidelines, everything needs to be black and white, there actually needs to be an advocate. There actually needs to be somebody within the community or within the system that is only there to support the family and the student in situations where this type of stuff is beginning to happen.
In Tala, 2 families who I'm supporting at the minute, one child has narcolepsy, and that's why he's being sent home. The father rang me one day almost crying, saying, I don't know what to do. He slumped in the classroom, so he just slumped, and they rang to take him home. Instead of waiting for him to come back around out of the condition that he has, they started sending him home every day at 10 o'clock, 1 hour in secondary school. And now his behaviours are, for him to be able to re-engage. Another school in West Tala as well, and I won't name schools, I don't think that's fair, but in another school in West Tala, you have a child who has dyslexia, no behavioural issues, loves school, and they are trying to influence that mother to put her on a reduced timetable because she struggles in some particular subjects in terms of dyslexia. Like, this is how it's being used. There would be nobody in the classroom left at this stage if we were to keep allowing this to be implemented in the way that it is. And I think we really need to look at a support service or a support person outside of the school community. So not necessarily the school liaison teacher, because that school liaison teacher at one stage was a teacher in the classroom the year before or the year before that, who automatically sometimes will understand why teachers feel they may need to do this. I'm wondering about when they do support to TUSLA, is it just filling of this form, or is there some sort of supporting document? And it says, like, around ticking in terms of was there parental involvement. You know, how do we know what that involvement looks like for a parent and what support that parent received? I mean, any school could just tick a lot of the boxes on this and send it off, but it's not really representative maybe of the experience that the family and student has had over a period of time with the school. And that's why I think some sort of advocate that exists within the department or within the school system that is part of them conversations and is a witness to the parental involvement and the student involvement in processes like this, because there will be medical situations. As the mother of someone on the autistic spectrum, I do know there will be medical situations where you will be better for your child to take them out for a period of time, and I'm talking about within 1 week, a few hours, because that day is particularly difficult, whether it be for sensory. I'm not talking about 6 weeks. It's really, really long. You think of how quick you move through a math curriculum in 6 weeks. You have a week sometimes in school on one particular part of the curriculum. Your classroom has already gone 3 or 4 times along the curriculum than you're able to catch up with. And parents that are already under-resourced from the communities where there's high deprivation and low educational attainment, they can't support their children at home to keep up with that curriculum. Because in many cases, the parents themselves have left school at 15, 16 years of age. I've one more question, which is, and it kind of seems a little bit off topic, but there's in schools right now with children's allowance, because so many kids are being suspended, expelled. Over the last number of years, I don't know where it came from, but this idea that when your child reaches 16, you have to get to school to stamp a form to say they are still in full-time education or your children's allowance is stopped. Now, this disproportionately affects working class communities, where on many occasions, because parents have refused reduced timetables, their kids have actually been expelled, and they've actually then, the welfare system comes in and removes their children's allowance. So somewhere along the lines, children's allowance, which wasn't set up as an educational payment, has now been linked to educational attendance. And I think it is going to disproportionately affect some of these families that are falling through the cracks in relation to reduced timetables and expulsions and suspensions not being, they shouldn't be the option, but they're also now, their families are ending up in even worse positions than they were, because now they're attaching a social welfare payment to it. And I just think it's something that your department should look at, and I don't know where that relationship has originally developed from. But I think my main point is that I really believe that there should be some sort of parent support worker or advocate that is engaged in any process that happens between a school, TUSLA, because the distrust in institutions, when you feel you have been targeted by institutions your whole life, it's very hard to go into a school and have a conversation with a principal in a suit. Actually, you end up just agreeing with everything they say because you nearly feel inadequate to be able to put up some sort of advocacy for yourself and your children. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. I'll just make a few brief comments myself before I come back to you, Minister, but just taking up on that particular issue, I think a lot of parents who have difficulties in terms of their children having shorter school days, because sometimes people have said to me, what does reduced timetables mean? means reduced hours within a school. Children are not in school for the recommended level of hours. And a lot of parents, because of different issues and possibly because of maybe challenging behaviour and intellectual disability, are absolutely exhausted trying to deal with the system. So I would agree that they need to have an advocate, like maybe a guardian ad litem, a GAL, as we call them, that would help support them with it. But I think it's important, no matter what, to remember that schools are not just a place for academic learning. They're a place where children grow socially, they develop social skills. It's a place that they also develop maybe emotional skills and development. And children that are not in school for full days are absolutely losing out on that. I myself am aware of a school in my own area where 8 children did not have any school for 6 months and then got a second level placement, and these are children with intellectual disability, young students. So last year they only started school in November. They straight away went on to a reduced timetable for every single day. And when they started this year in September, they were told that there would be a reduced timetable for the next 2 years. So that's every one of the 167 days of a school year. And that's absolutely not good enough. Minister, you were talking about the financial investment in special education, the number of special teachers, the number of SNAs, and while that's acknowledged, it's not just about the money that's invested, it's about the outcomes for the children. And that is absolutely the most important part of it. Minister, I note with the draft recommendations that you've made that you're going to have full consultation with educational stakeholders. I would ask you that you would ensure that a copy of our report, our interim report that we have made, is sent with that consultation request, because I think it's important that we as a committee have the opportunity for our voices to be heard. And this was a cross-party committee, and I think we were all completely shocked with what we learned. We do acknowledge that the topic is absolutely multifaceted, but we feel very strongly that it has to be taken out of the shadows, and we intend to have further engagement. That's why we brought out the interim report, and we do appreciate your coming today to engage with us on this, and we wanted that to be part of where we need to go next as a committee with this. Education is a constitutional right of all children and it cannot be undermined at any level in terms of unregulated practice. But I'm going to go to you now, Minister. I am conscious of your time.
Thanks very much, Chairperson. And I'd just like to thank everybody's contribution. I know there were a number of questions, but also there were a number of suggestions therein as well, which is really, really helpful because, as I said at the outset, it was this committee that did quite a bit of heavy lifting around this issue. And when you consider, like you reported in June, your interim report, and supposed to take the last question first, or your suggestion about keeping you involved, I think it'd be really, really important that that happens right through the consultation. Happy to provide a copy of your report to the stakeholders, and in fact a lot of your suggestions or recommendations are framing these guidelines. And on top of that, with going Jan O'Sullivan's question around time frame, I would like to work within quite a tight time frame around this. Consultation will be up to the end of 18th of October, so we're looking at this year to try to get something in there and get something working for the new year or the new term. So let's work together on that, and I'd be happy to include you on that. Thomas Byrne's questions. First of all, every child has a legal right to education, and you were on about the evidence and the lack of evidence. And I mean, let's face it. You were working on anecdotal as a committee, but the department was working on that anecdotal as well. So the whole idea of this exercise, and also for these guidelines, is to find out the scale and the nature of the issue that we're dealing with here, and that will determine where resources will flow after that and how practice will be shaped. You mentioned behavioural issues, like we do. we do have medical issues, we do have mental health issues. I mean, I previously stated the position of the department is all pupils who are enrolled in the school should attend school for the full day, unless exempted from doing so for exceptional circumstances such as medical reasons, and that reduced timetable should not be used as a de facto suspension or as a behavioural management technique, and that's what was happening. It was being used as an intervention in that case. This is still very much the case, and my position has not changed in this. So there will be a process, there will be guidelines. The principal will inform TUSLA, and if timetables or reduced timetables have to be used, there has to be a reason and an outline process and continuum explaining that this is part of the reintegration. So we're going to be very, very clear and transparent around that. You also mentioned issues around the special school deputy in Dublin 15 when it is opening. The training, as far as I'm aware, for the team, the entire team, has been completed. So we're in a position now to start. I'll inform you as soon as I have that readily available. But we're in the cusp of, if not, next week, the following week. But one of the demands from the parents was very clear. They want it done in a phased process. So that's something that we're adhering to as well. But your point also about resources and training. Well, there's no point having a guideline around reduced timetables if we're not putting in adequate resources and training and support into schools, so that will come hand in glove. The Deputy Kathleen Martin, scepticism. I think when you embark on anything new that has been basically left out and there's been a gaping hole, like we have to figure it out and figure it out properly, and that's why the consultation will be so important with the key stakeholders. And I mentioned in particular the Parents' Council, and people were talking about empowering parents, and their voice will be really important in that consultation. And you were asking about what happens when the parent says no. That parent will be empowered. That parent will have a right to say no to a proposed potential reduced timetable, and that parent will have the right to say that this is still a de facto suspension. So there is the process then around dealing with through Section 29 under the Education Act to appeal directly to the department if they're not satisfied. So we have to be very clear and continuing to empower the parent in that regard. Consultation with NEPs, the work of the department was just. The guidelines are underpinned by the principles that a reduced timetable, reduced day is never used as a sanction, offered as an alternative to a sanction, or used as a behavioural management tool, that it should be applied proportionately and should last only as long as is necessary to facilitate a return to school on a full-time basis. These guidelines should be read in conjunction with relevant guidelines from TUSLA, including developing a code of behaviour, guideline for schools and statement of strategy for school attendance. Other resources include information on NEPs and support from the Department of Education and Science. So it's important that all that there is communication lines at all time, and that our school inclusion pilot is something that it's a place where we're all trying to get to, where we do have the HSE, we do have the Department of Education, we do have Department of Children and Youth Affairs, where we do have the Department of Health working hand in glove. And that is why we will be informed by that school inclusion pilot.
Sorry, through the Chair, just on that, the last two answers are sort of connected. What happens when the parent says no? And you said it'd be like a de facto suspension, and they have Section 29.
Yeah,
and then the next answer you gave me was it should not be used as a sanction. But surely a suspension, if you're calling it a suspension, which it really is
but
a sanction.
Well, it's been used as a sanction. Yeah.
So then it is being used as a sanction, even though it shouldn't be used as a sanction if the only. But that's how do you address that then?
But that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to ensure that the material, the information we have, to be informed, the scale, the extent of the issue, and to find out exactly if there's resource deficiencies, if there's a weakness within the school system that it's resource dependent. We're not informed at the moment because we only have anecdotal evidence. So What we're trying to do here is to ensure that process number one, and that's why the guidelines will be so important, and the consultation with the educational partners, with your continued observations as well, to ensure that the parent and the voice of the young person is that they know what the transparent process is. But we're not working from scratch here, we're not working from a blank page, but I do know that we have a very complex issue here where, on the one hand, parents and students feel aggrieved, and naturally so, and on the other hand, we have issues in school where boards of management or principals or teachers will be saying, well, we don't have adequate resources to work through this situation. So it's about informing ourselves, the scale and the extent, and that's why I don't want to see this being used as a behavioural mechanism. And it is being used as a tool for dealing with behavioural issues at the moment. It is being used as a sanction, and I want to move away from that. You also asked around the hard limit on the use of reduced timetables. 6 weeks is a long time. It is a long time, but there has to be a plan put together. You know, one of the Senator Lynn Ruane mentioned, or I think it was Senator Gavan mentioned the 1 hour a day. Like that's not acceptable, that you could have a 1 hour a day over a period of 6 weeks. There has to be a progression. There has to be, if it has to be 1 hour a day the first day, and move towards the reintegration within that period. 6 weeks is the period that we're putting out there for our consultation. If there's varying degrees of feedback on whether that time is appropriate or not, obviously we're listening, and we're open to hear feedback on that. No reference. There is no reference to gender. There is a reference to ethnicity. There. Obviously, you know.
Oversight, is it?
No, I'm not. My own personal opinion is, like, a young person's a young person, whether they're male or female, in terms of how this is about equal treatment for each individual. So,
I just think it may be interesting when you're gathering the data to see if it's young boys from a certain socio-economic background, or if it's younger. You know, it's just, I think it may be something.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, look, it's something to put in there. Yeah. Scaling it, more consultation. You referenced as well. You talked about an annual report. That data is going to be really, really important. It's going to inform us as a department as to where resources are needed and where they should be directed. But you also raised the issue of capacity. And capacity is something I'm very, very conscious of, that we need to ensure that under the new model of support for schools, that we have that capacity and that support in our schools. And you talk about the complaint structure to be transparent, and I think I've covered that already.
Sorry, again, it's through the chair.
Because I just am conscious, I know the Minister has to be in the chamber in a moment. So if we have a little bit of time afterwards, I'll come back to you.
Deputy O'Leary talked about the anecdotal evidence. I think I've covered that. We're working on anecdotal evidence. Similarly, the department is working on anecdotal evidence on this particular issue. I accept and agree a lot of the recommendations you asked. Do we? You know, most of the recommendations that have come into these guidelines came from the report. You also talked about regulation versus guidelines. Like a lot of the guidelines, a lot of the circulars that go to schools in the first instance, no matter what issue you're dealing with, it's in the form of guidelines as well. And once we have a system in place that TUSLA is to be informed once a reduced timetable has been introduced, that's something that will be recorded and will form part of the data. Resources, scale and nature, once again, reintegration, you're talking about process and flexibility, and no excuse for the manner as to how this was used in the past. And there is no excuse. There is no excuse for allowing a situation to emerge whereby a child has been disadvantaged from an education, a right to an education, a constitutional right. So that is something that we're all working towards, and we have to ensure that. I certainly believe that if a school is not complying, like there's no specific sanction for them not complying. But what we hope to do here is to be informed as to the scale and extent of the resourcing need, and if there is extra resources needed in these issues, in these areas, we'll certainly do that. Deputy Jan O'Sullivan, 27, you quoted 27% of educational welfare officers were aware of schools using reduced timetables. Rob, you highlighted an information deficit there. Much better and more robust collection of data required. You also talked about parents' consent, equal relationship, and I also talked about the voice of the child. Different groups, different stories. Really important that we get it right. And role of inspectorate, and as you'll be aware yourself, Deputy, the role of inspectorate is specifically to look at the quality of learning and the quality of teaching. That is the specific role of the inspectorate in the Department of Education. You also, just to, I suppose, read, the inspectorate will continue in the context of the work to evaluate the effectiveness of schools' implementation of specific interventions and initiatives and to provide up-to-date information to the system. Time frame, I think I've said that already, 18th of October. Consultation ends on the 18th of October. Senator Gavan, you referenced the 1 hour, which is unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and to have no plan as to how to reintegrate that student back into education. And data collection is absolutely key, and that's a gaping hole here. We don't have that data, and if it was being used and is being used as a behavioural deficit, that is not, or as a behavioural tool, that is not acceptable. I did reference the social inclusion pilot for the reason of, you also mentioned ASD classes, and you mentioned, you know, the difference between primary and post-primary and where the investment's going. And if you consider we've 4,000 schools, at the moment we've got upwards of 1,500 special classes. So some schools are providing up to 4 classes, some schools are providing 1 class, but do a quick mathematical summary of that, about less than 25% of our schools have special classes. So this is an enormous challenge to try to get it right. And as the chairperson did point out, we are investing a lot of resources in special education, 1 out of every €5, but we still have a long, long way to go. And there's parents out there today, and they're finding difficulties in accessing post-primary, difficulty in accessing preschool, primary school, but that is a massive, massive issue and a challenge that we want to meet head on. But if I can see when I see 2 departments, a Department of Health with a budget of 17 billion, the department that I preside over with a budget of nearly 11 billion, I can see enormous potential for a lot more collaboration between the 2. In terms of whether, you know, mentioned behavioural issues today, that the school inclusion pilot is going to be looking at speech and language, occupational therapy, potential for physio, even though it's not in the pilot, but also a behavioural therapist, to have a behavioural therapist in the school. So we're trying to get from where we are now to go to a place where there's a lot more joined up thinking and a lot more integration on an interdepartmental level, and also on an between state agencies. And I think that is something, and I think Lynn Ruane's contribution, which I thought was a very interesting contribution around empowering parents. And I know you were referencing Tala, and you didn't want to pick out any schools in particular. And I have my own fond memories of Tala, doing my teaching practice in Springfield and St Mark's. And the classroom I was in back in 1993 is a different country to where the classrooms are today. I went in as a student teacher, and we just stuck to the subject area and we got on with it. And it was a different scenario to the classes that I go into in either primary or secondary now. A lot more complexity. And if there's something needed there in terms of empowering parents in their decision making is around to what's best for their son or daughter, it's something that we have to be open to as well. And I know you did reference medical, or, you know, maybe a reduced timetable for a particular particular day. We have to be open to all of these new ways of thinking around how we deal with complex issues. But I think that notion of having some sort of support, and I suppose I don't want to use just jargon around capacity building for parents, but just to help them make the decision, because I'm reminded of when I was a youth worker in Letterkenny. Like, one of the things that I did when I'm just thinking to your contribution, and I did it informally, when parents would approach me about something that was happening in primary school, they were looking for my advice and advocacy. Now, maybe it wasn't right all the time, but they were reaching out when that level of trust. So, and that goes back again, like all the different informal places, you know, whether it's you know, community groups, youth groups, or whatever. Like, maybe there's something there. I think you have hit something there that I've experienced myself, and maybe helping parents make that decision. And I certainly would like to explore that a little bit further.
Sorry, Minister, we received a note 5 minutes ago. We were waiting for you in the chamber. I assume that you received it as well, but we will excuse you if you need to attend, or you can continue.
I think I'm on a topical issue.
You are?
Oh, I am. Right. Is now the time? Because I switched my phone off because I was very obedient there. You asked me to switch my phone off.
You know.
But look, I'm probably just about
Can
okay.
the officials stay to listen? I know they can't speak probably,
Yeah.
but can they stay to listen to any observations that we may have if the Minister?
No, look, can I ask, because, you know, we had waited to get this date with you, and it was less than satisfactory, but we did agree that that you needed to go to the chamber. We were asked, would we try to get you in and out? But could I ask that maybe you would come back in maybe a month's time, or following the consultation, because there will be follow-up questions, most certainly. And I do agree with that, what Deputy Byrne has mentioned, that if the officials can just stay, I appreciate they can't respond, but if there are further you know, comments coming back looking for clarification. So we will release you.
Chair, can they respond?
No,
okay,
not
fine.
allowed, yeah.
Happy
whatever
with
the
the
rule
rule
is.
is.
No, we will release you to your other duties, and I want to thank you for your attendance, your contribution.
Okay.
Thanks,
Chair.
Minister.
Thank you.
I think they're just moving to topical issues on the screen there.
Yeah. Slán. Ramagath. Okay, now, do any of the members want to make another comment or observation based on what the Minister has said? Deputy Byrne.
Yeah, I just had just one or two things there, and just the document that's written, actually, the more I look at it, it doesn't look like the type of document that normally emanates from the Department of Education, and maybe that's because it emanates from TUSLA, I don't know, but it doesn't look like a circular the department would issue. And I say this without any disrespect to anybody. It doesn't appear to be written with the same level of precision that one would normally associate Department of Education documents or circulars. They're normally extremely precise. And what I would say is that in this document, that I think you need to have it much clearer as to the circumstances when these can happen, and then much clearer as to what the procedures are thereafter. The procedures are, in terms of the number 4, the key requirements, that mixes up the reasons for this with the procedures, and the procedures are very, very long and drawn out. I think they could be very easily reduced to bullet points as do this, do this, do this. And then the form, again, doesn't require any evidence as to the necessity for the reduced timetables, when that's actually a key requirement, according to what the Minister says today. So that's not required to be provided from my reading of it. The form also refers to a right of appeal. And again, I'm not clear what that right of appeal is. The only appeals that I'm aware of would be under Section 29 in terms of appeals against suspension or expulsion. So what does that refer to? And I think that the document would do well to quote what the gentleman from TUSLA, I just don't recall his name. No, he was superb anyway. He was very, very clear that this was a suspension or an expulsion where these reduced timetables were being brought in without, you know, in an unorthodox fashion. And I think that it would be very useful for the document to remind school authorities of that as well. What I would say as well is there's also Section 5 on this about supports available to schools, and I'm just not sure that it's required to have a you know, a plug for the Department of Education or whoever. It's fine. We know everything that's done, but I think the document really needs to be much more in the form of a circular, and it just doesn't appear to be written in that way. Now, whether it was done rushed or whatever, and again, I don't mean any disrespect, because in fairness to the Minister, and if you do read the document the way I'd like it to be read, you can read that it's very, very strict. But I just think if it were more precise, I think it would definitely help everybody. But look, I don't mean to be, facetious or nitpicking, but I think we all agree this is a really important issue. Like, we just have to get it right. And I certainly, if it's available, I would certainly welcome a meeting with the officials privately to discuss this as well, like, to be of help, not to be of any inconvenience.
Okay, well, we certainly asked the Department that. Deputy Martin, I know I cut you off earlier, but I was conscious.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think with the Minister, I just wasn't sure if he was talking about a capacity issue for an annual published report, because I was just going to say that it has to be done.
It has to be.
We need to be able to see it.
Yeah.
And again, on the form, it doesn't leave much for detail. Has a plan been developed to support the students' return to full education? Yes, no. But I'd like to, see the plan.
Yeah.
I think that TUSA should be seeing the plan. It's a lot of box ticking here without the detail, and refer to have it child-centred. So,
okay, thank you. Deputy O'Leary.
Yeah, look, I suppose just to re-emphasise a point that I don't think the Minister responded, and obviously the officials can't respond, but if it can be taken into account, I'm just not totally sure that the bullet point H there makes sense. I think there should be, I'm not sure that there should always be additional work provided. I'm not sure that it always be suitable. I just re-emphasise again the point in relation to, if the school isn't complying, what are the consequences, because it's not immediately clear to me that it will be possible for the department to enforce that. But just, I suppose, a final point as well, there's been a bit of discussion about resources a few years ago when the last allocation of additional DESH designations came out. There was no DESH Band 2, there's no new schools added to the DESH Band 2 category. A lot of those schools, in a much less resource intensive way than with DESH Band 1, that wouldn't require the same reduced pupil-teacher ratios and so on, but they would avail of school completion, and they would avail of home school liaison support. So I actually think that is a resource that needs to be looked at again, and in many instances good work done with school completion and home school liaison could actually prevent some of these issues arising, because I think the relationship between the family, the child and the school would be, I think, retained in a much better way. So I think that is a point that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan.
Yeah, just briefly, just to take up Deputy Byrne's point about if a parent doesn't agree with and effectively it becomes a suspension, that there should be something in between that and a Section 29, that it shouldn't have to go straight to a Section 29 where it becomes kind of confrontational, and I don't know whether there's a role for education welfare officers. Somebody mentioned advocates, Lynn I think mentioned advocates, but whether an education welfare officer could have a role of, advocating for the child in that situation. But there needs to be something anyway, I think, I agree, between parents not agreeing and not wanting reduced timetable and their only avenue being a Section 29 appeal.
Thank you.
Okay, just very quickly, because we have
Sullivan, just on that,
very special guests.
I agree with, this is so important for the children with special needs. I agree with Deputy O'Sullivan, there should be a middle ground there, but the only reason I wanted to mention in terms of a suspension or expulsion was that I think it just prods people into acting, because I think it just really highlights how serious this is, that if you do this wrong, you're on a suspension, you're on an expulsion, and that's a whole different ball game from the school's point of view as well. That's the only reason I wanted that.
Okay, thank you. And just to make a comment that one of the suggestions which would be coming from ourselves as a committee would be that reduced timetables be classified as a separate category and not recorded as a form of suspension, because that would be seen as a sanction or a punishment. In some cases, it's actually not. Can I thank all of the officials from the department, and we will be in contact in terms of the possibility of members of the committee accessing time to discuss some of the issues with yourselves, not in committee, but being able to have a meeting. I think that would be useful, having an across the table conversation between yourselves and between ourselves. So we will be in touch in relation to that. But I want to thank you for your attendance and thank the members for their valuable contributions also. We're now going to suspend for 2 minutes to allow our next witnesses to take their places. So, Gurv Malcolm. We're going to resume our meeting now in public session, and we've reached item 2 on the agenda, which is engagement with Solace, followed by an engagement with Ireland's representatives at the World Skills Competition in Russia. And the purpose of this part of the meeting is to welcome Mr. Andrew Brownlee, the new Chief Executive Officer of Solace, who will talk to us about the success of the Irish team who represented Ireland in Russia earlier this year. And also, we'd like to take the opportunity to wish you well as you come into this role. Thank you, Andrew. So yet again, the Irish team has done us proud by winning 4 gold medals, 1 bronze medal, and 7 medallions for excellence. This is an excellent achievement, and I've no doubt that all of you as competitors are very proud of your achievements. We're very interested to hear about your experience as a competitor at the competition. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome Andrew, as I mentioned earlier, Ray English, who's the chair of World Skills Ireland, Luke O'Keefe, Ryan Dempsey, Ryan McLoughlin, Megan Yates, Hannah Mathe, Pat Toomey, Chris Keogh, Adam Flynn, Jack Lynch and Mark Wasson, who represented Ireland as part of the delegation. And I also wish to welcome the following people who are in attendance in the gallery, because every team always needs to have a good supportive team beside them. So we have Shauna Dunlop, who was an official observer, along with David Tracy, Michael Hourahan, who was an official delegate, Nicky Gallagher, of course, we've had before as Director of Communications and Secretariat in Solace, Emma Kelly, Communications Officer with Solace, Vivian Patterson and Louise Sherry from the Higher Education Authority, and you're all very welcome also. So the format of this part of the meeting is that I will invite Andrew to make a brief opening statement, and followed by Ray, and we'll have an engagement with the members of the committees. But if any of you would like to speak at any point, just please indicate to me, and I'm certainly more than happy to allow you to speak. And you can do that following Andrew or Ray, or indeed following the questions or comments that we have from the members. But before we begin, I wish to draw your attention, and this is something formally that I have to do, to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of your evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by myself as Chair to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in relation to your evidence. And you are directed by myself that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I also wish to advise you that any opening statements you've made to the committee will be published on the committee website after the meeting. And I also wish to remind members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that you should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So I'd now like to call on Mr Andrew Brownlee, CEO of Solus, to make his opening statement. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the good wishes, and I'm looking forward to working with the committee and helping you in any way we can moving forward. I'm going to keep this brief because I know who you really want to hear from are the kind of World Skills team, but I suppose on behalf of Solus, the HEA and World Skills Ireland, I'd like to thank the Joint Committee for the opportunity today to celebrate the excellent performance by a brilliant team of young apprentices, trainees and students at the World Skills competition in Russia in August. I'm delighted to be joined today by members of the team, Ray English, Chair of World Skills Ireland and his colleagues, and Vivian Patterson of the HEA. I'd like to provide a short overview of the World Skills competition and explain how Solus, the HEA and the Department of Education and Skills and providers support the Irish team. The World Skills competition, which is held every 2 years, has a 60-year history and is the biggest vocational education and skills event in the world. The competitors represent the best of their peers in 56 different skills and are selected from skills competitions in over 77 World Skills member countries and regions. The Department of Education and Skills introduced national and international skills competitions in Ireland in 1957, and Ireland has taken part in every single competition since. Funding of almost 400,000 for the World Skills team comes from a number of sources: Solus, the HEA and ETBI, who represent the Education and Training Boards. World Skills Kazan took place from the 22nd to the 27th of August. It involved 63 countries, more than 1,300 competitors and had over 200,000 visitors. The opening and closing ceremonies were held in the Kazan Stadium, were attended by over 40,000 people and were broadcast live on Russian TV to approximately 45 million viewers. Ceremonies were also screened live on the internet. I know a lot of people in Ireland were tuning in so that everyone could be part of these Olympic-style spectacular shows. The closing ceremony was addressed live by President Putin. The World Skills Conference, which was run in parallel with all the competitions, included contributions from people such as Scott Kelly, a NASA astronaut, and our very own Minister for Skills, John Halligan. The Irish team was made up of 17 young apprentices, trainees and students. They are Cormac Thompson, Alana O'Sullivan, Ryan Dempsey, Luke O'Keefe, Jack Lynch, Oliver Balpetre, Hannah Mattey, Glenn McNamara, Adam Flynn, Mark Wasson, Megan Yates, Patrick Toomey, Jack O'Donnell, Rory Grealish, Jennifer Mangan, Christopher Keogh and Ryan McLoughlin. They showcased their skills in areas of aircraft maintenance, beauty therapy, building information modelling, bricklaying, cabinet making, cloud computing, construction metalwork, cookery, electrical installation, freight forwarding, industrial mechanic millwright, joinery, plumbing and heating, restaurant service, visual merchandising and welding. The competitors spent several months prior to the competition being trained by experts at TU Dublin, at Institutes of Technology in Cork, Limerick, Waterford, Dundalk, Carlow and Athlone, and education training boards at Kerry, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, Clare, Donegal and Dublin Dunleary, and also Shannon College of Hotel Management. The training and the hard work paid off. Ireland has a long history of winning medals and medallions for excellence, and this year was no different. The team won 4 gold medals, 1 bronze medal, a Best of Nation medal and 7 medallions of excellence. Ireland is now ranked 10th in the world for skills in terms of the medal rankings. I'm sure you'll hear from the teams themselves in more detail about this remarkable achievement. Ireland has also been chosen to host the next World Skills General Assembly and Conference, which will take place on the 5th to the 8th October 2020 in Dublin, and plans are progressing to finalise this and the next Ireland Skills Live event following the success of the inaugural event in March this year. I would like to conclude by saying that the World Skills competitions are an excellent way to promote Ireland's skills to a global audience. Our brilliant teams benchmark the quality of education, training and skills against the best of the world. They are also incredible role models here at home for anyone considering their post-secondary education choices.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'd like to welcome Deputy Mary Butler, who's Chair of the Business Committee, and indeed, besides ourselves doing a report in relation to apprenticeships, I know that Deputy Butler's committee also commissioned and presented a report as well. Thank you for that, Andrew. Ray, would you like to say a few words?
Just if I may, Chair, just a small few words. I think it's really worth noting that World Skills Ireland primarily remains a volunteer organisation, from the competitors themselves, who after selection commit to training, to the experts who we rely on to train to World Skills standards, often for up to 40 hours a week, do it all on a voluntary basis. And that training takes place targeted in education and training boards, institutes of technology and Technical University Dublin. The basis of this team came from the 2019 Ireland Skills Live competition, which was held in March, as has been noted in the RDS, and that attracted 15,000 young people to have a look at the skills who went to Kazan and many more who didn't, in actual competitions live with a career and education expo on the side. The support of the Higher Education Authority, SOLAS, and industry partners such as John Sisk & Sons in delivering Ireland Skills Live, I think, needs to be noted, and that led to the great success that we saw in Kazan. And I think it's really important just to note that it was each team member who gave us that overall 10th position. And indeed, of any of the indices, Ireland came in the top 20 of the 63 countries that participated in Kazan. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ray. Just on behalf of the committee, before we have the engagement, I would just like to congratulate each and one of you in terms of the achievements that you've made. Like, it's incredible to think of the Olympic standard and to think how well you have done, and across such a wide breadth of different skills and areas. It's really fascinating. And secondly, on behalf of the state, I want to thank you and to acknowledge the positive impression of Ireland that I've no doubt that you gave over in Russia, and that's hugely important. We want to send our very best people over because you are ambassadors for us abroad, and I've no doubt that with the significant achievements that you made, that you absolutely played that role really, really well. And thirdly, and most importantly, I just want to acknowledge the inspiration that I've no doubt you are to the young people in Ireland. You're an inspiration to your fellow citizens, to your fellow students, and indeed you are to us as committee members, and I've no doubt that you're very proud, along with your families, of what you absolutely have achieved. Normally, and you did have the opportunity to sit in earlier to our earlier hearing in relation to reduced timetables, but normally parliamentary committees discuss what's wrong in society and the difficulties and the problems that we have, and particularly within the education and skills system that we deal with in this committee. And in our experience, these problems affect, particularly younger people and vulnerable people. But it's so refreshing and encouraging to have you here, to have a chance to shine a light in terms of what you have achieved. And I think that, despite the difficulties and problems that we have in society, that the work that you do and your achievements will give all of us better hope for the future ahead of us. So I'd like now to ask you to, if you'd like to say a few words, maybe about your experience and about your own particular skill and achievement. And if you're not comfortable with doing that, that's absolutely fine as well. So if anybody who wants to say a few words would like to indicate, we're more than happy. Megan.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you for inviting us in. It's an amazing opportunity to get to come in and speak on behalf of the team, and everybody I know will want to give their input, and also to thank the team that we have behind us. As you say, it doesn't happen as a single person. It's a great team that support us, that bring us along. I suppose in terms of, to introduce myself, to give a little bit of background, my name is Megan Yates. I won gold in the freight forwarding category at the World Skills. It was the very first year that freight forwarding made it to the World Skills. Prior to that, 2 years ago, it was a future skill that it was being tested. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to take part in it as the first year going. It was, World Skills is an absolutely amazing opportunity to get to represent your country on an international level. Is just, there isn't enough words to put into it to say how great it was. But I suppose as well what you take away from it is the training opportunity that we had leading up to it. So I know myself, I had 10 weeks of intensive training from June till August, and that was supported by TU Dublin. And as Ray mentioned, I had my chief expert who did it on a volunteer basis, and I was training 5 days a week, so Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So it is intense. There is a lot that goes into it. You go over and you are against the best in the world, so you know you have to give it your all. You have to be as informed as you can, and you're going over there wanting to nearly know more than your expert does. And in my case, my expert has quite a few number of years ahead of me. But I think it's amazing the support that we get from the institutes, and I know some of my colleagues here had the opportunity to train with different institutes across the country. I myself was very lucky that I got to go out into my industry. So my background is I completed my logistics and supply chain level 8 undergrad in TU Dublin. So a lot of the companies that would support the college through the work placements were very welcoming and opened their doors to me throughout the summer and took me on and gave me training as well. There wasn't a single person in industry that was approached that refused to get involved. So I think that's very refreshing to see that all the companies out there are very supportive as well of the younger generation coming on, and they want to give that support as well to nurturing our skills and helping to educate us to make us the leaders and to make us the industry experts moving forward into the future. I'd like to pass it on to one of my colleagues now who'd like to continue.
And of course that partnership that you highlighted is incredibly important. And of course as a Kildare person we're very proud of you in Kildare as well.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to say a few words about how they found the experience and maybe something about your own area of expertise? Well, okay, well, maybe afterwards when there's a few questions maybe from the members. I'm going to hand over to the members then. Deputy Sullivan.
Yeah, well, can I just congratulate, join with the Chair and just congratulate all of you. It's an incredible achievement, and I know that Ireland has been really successful over the years, and well done to everybody who's been involved in it. I suppose one of the things that I feel strongly about is the fact that opportunities for young people coming out of school don't have to be sort of the standard go to college, get a degree, whatever. And, you know, Solace, and I commend Solace on the work that's been done in relation to apprenticeships and the new apprenticeships and so on that are now available. And I suppose my main question really, if I'm to ask a question, is, and Megan has already given us an example, but have some of you got some experience around how what you've done will help you in terms of a career and your job opportunities now? Because I think it's so important for young people to recognise that by going down that skills route, that there are fantastic opportunities out there, and I suppose particularly for those of you who have represented the country so well. So I think that's my main question, but just, I suppose, to congratulate each and every one of you. And I don't know if Solace would like to respond, in relation to the new apprenticeships and whether some of those are tested in the skills. I mean, traditionally there were a number of skills. I think you said 56 different ones. Yeah. So whether the numbers have increased in recent years and whether Ireland is participating in a wider range now than they did before. But just well done.
Yeah, absolutely, Deputy. Sorry.
No, it's fine. We'll wait until everybody's an opportunity and then we'll come back to you. Deputy Martin.
And of course to say congratulations and gorgeous on your wonderful achievements at World Skills this year, and also to commend the work of Solas HEA and the volunteers in World Skills Ireland and what you're doing for our youth. On that world stage, you are, like, don't underestimate the inspirational role models you are for the youth of Ireland as they ponder upon, you know, what is my next career, that you're showing them the potential that they have. I am interested in knowing, from a school point of view, do you think your schools or your career guidance counsellors give you enough encouragement to consider apprenticeship? What was your experience in secondary school on that? And secondly, I noticed of the 17, 4 were women. I was looking at that, that's roughly the percentage of women we have in the Dáil. So we definitely need more women in the Dáil, and we definitely need more women apprentices. So I particularly asked the women, but I would like answers from some of the young men here as well. So with the women, what have your own experience been, and what can we do to get more women involved on this? And from the men, what do you think we can do to get more women involved in apprenticeship? Because it's an untapped resource. There's such potential there.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Martin. Deputy O'Leary.
Thanks, Chair, and congratulations, Cors Clare. Thanks very much for coming before us. Patrick, I'm sorry to single you out. I think I saw you in the Echo, I think, in the run-up to your Kool-Aid man, I think. But congratulations to you all. It's an amazing achievement. There's clearly a strong track record there over the last couple of years. I suppose a few questions for the participants, but also for Solas as well. Obviously, there are new courses opening up, and we're moving in the right direction, but we're still a long way behind Germany's and Austria's in terms of, like, I think they have well into the hundreds of occupations. I'm not sure how many occupations you could tell me now that we have. I don't know. It's certainly less than 100. I would say it's in the 40s kind of thing. So, like, I mean, I would say there's surely significant scope for enhancing that. So maybe if you can tell us a bit about how you intend to move in that direction, how we might move towards how they manage things in Germany or Austria. I have a very specific question as well, I suppose, just something that's come up with industry is there many in instrumentation and electrical instrumentation at the minute? Because so far as I know, there is a serious shortage of something that comes up with business people in Cork, pharmaceuticals, things like that. There's a gap there. It's a really, really attractive trade, but there doesn't seem to be many people going into it. So maybe just if you haven't answered that, just that's anecdotal. I suppose in terms of the participants, like, I mean, look, it's probably difficult for you to say maybe what could be fixed about the system at the minute, given the environment and whatever, but maybe if you can tell us, I mean, what are the best elements of the apprenticeship system in Ireland? I suppose maybe what we need to work on, but I suppose also to ask the question, like, do you think you have a role? There's many schools across the country that don't really give many students the option of entering an apprenticeship, and it's not really open as an option for them. People are discouraged, and it's not really considered a viable option. So do you think there's a role for yourselves, as well as in Solas, in going into schools and in outlining the positive experience that you've had and how it can be an attractive option? And if I might, like, I know people might be reluctant to speak, just maybe to give us a sense of how diverse your ranges are. Could you tell us actually what competitions you entered, just in a phrase, just to let us know what were the competitions you entered and competed in? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Byrne.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming in, and just to reiterate the congratulations that everybody here has expressed to you for your participation, for your representation of the country, and the achievements at the World Games of becoming leaders in the world in your particular fields, and that's the way you have to look at it. I think that part of being here is recognition for that. I think the Minister quite rightly criticised some of the media here, who shall remain nameless, for not giving the recognition. I think it's important that we do. I know 45 million people saw you on Russian television, and it's up to us to, I suppose, as public representatives, to do our best to promote this, because it certainly is one of the few world championships on this scale, and it is of a huge scale, that has a lower profile in the country. I think that is a problem. And I think that if the media are listening, which is always someone listening, please show this hearing, not us, we get on the telly all the time, or we hope to, but you guys, to show the achievements that you've made. And I think that's really, really important. You've represented the country at the highest possible level in your chosen field. Now, again, I don't expect you to answer questions, but I have a couple of... You've all come to apprenticeships, and I want to know, has anyone any ideas for how we can promote apprenticeships and skills at school? Maybe there was a good intervention with some of you, or a good guidance counsellor, a good teacher, a good ETB person, whatever. If anyone has any suggestions on that. And if the two ladies who are here could tell us, is there anything they feel could be done to encourage more women in? Because, I mean, it is the outstanding example of a lack of women in Irish society is in the apprenticeship field. I mean, it's just crazy in terms of the low numbers of women. Can I ask Megan in particular what brought her to your particular category of apprenticeship, which is relatively unusual, and how did that happen?
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, to think that only 4% of apprentices were female last year, and only 2% prior to that is quite shocking. Deputy Butler.
Gorv Mahakul Kahirlak. And from the outset, can I just thank you for the warm welcome to your committee. I am chair of the Oireachtas Committee for Business, Enterprise and Innovation, and there is a little bit of an overlap. So firstly, I would like to congratulate you, World Skills Ireland team, to be ranked 10th in the world, 4 gold medals, 1 bronze medal, Best of Nation medal, 7 medallions of excellence. Sure, we could say it all day long and we could repeat it over and over. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it's an amazing opportunity to represent your country at an international level. And I have no doubt the commitment, the determination, and as Megan quite rightly pointed out there, the 5 days a week training for 8 weeks, I'm sure that was the same for all of you. And to see the absolute commitment and dedication you gave to represent Ireland, I just want to, on behalf of the Oireachtas Committee for Business, Enterprise and Innovation, I want to say well done to each and every one of you, and also to your mentors. It's absolutely a fantastic achievement, and the committee on a personal level will be writing to each one of you individually. As the Cathaoirleach said quite rightly, last year we had 15,500 apprentices in Ireland, but there was only 400 of them taken by women. So it's absolutely an appalling number. And apprentices have a key role to play in addressing the skills needs going forward. And I suppose when we looked at, my committee looked at the role of apprentices in relation to work permits. And what we found was, I suppose, during the recession and during the downturn, there was more of a focus put in secondary schools on academia as against on learn as you earn or earn as you learn in relation to apprentices. And I just think, especially in relation to guidance counsellors, that we lost a lot of guidance counsellors also during the recession. It's very important now that it's not only the VEC schools, or the ETB as they're called now, that it's not only those type of schools that can encourage you to do all the different trades. Because my own daughter is only 13, and when she started in secondary school last year, her favourite subject is tech graphics, because she absolutely loved maths, and I never thought that she would be drawn towards that. And if she hadn't got the opportunity at her school to engage with a subject such as tech graphics, we would never have known that that's maybe the way she would like to go. So just a couple of questions in relation to, as it's great to see Hannah and Megan here. Was it only the two of you was there only 2 female representatives on the team? That's the first question I'd like to ask. And I would also like to concur with what the Chair said, that I did notice when you returned, and it was from my own colleague in Waterford, the Minister was very, very disappointed at the lack of media coverage he got. And on a personal level, as a deputy from Waterford, I would like to congratulate Adam and Hannah, just to get that in as well. But once again, I would just like to say, well done, and I would like to compliment the Cathaoirleach, Deputy O'Loughlin, for having you in here today, for acknowledging what you have done, and, you know, onwards and upwards, and the best of luck to you all in your future careers. Gorv Mahagut.
Thank you very much, Deputy. And now I actually am going to put you on the spot. So I am. I've given you enough time now to warm up. And I'm just going to ask you about your own area of expertise, because, to be honest, when I was listening to the different areas, I just thought it was just incredible to have such a wide variety. So you can just say a little bit about it, and about how you think apprenticeship or training can be given more prominence, because it does seem to be a fact that there's less parity of esteem with apprenticeships as opposed to academic subjects or degrees. And as a committee, we have discussed this several times. We believe that's completely wrong, but we want to be able to help raise the profile, and we want to get ideas from you how you can do that. So Luke, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Chair.
And obviously you can address some of the questions that have come up.
First of all, thanks for inviting us up here. And my skill is BIM, so it's Building Information Modelling. So myself and Ryan Dempsey, our team over in Russia, where we had to basically make 3D models of buildings. And so it's more architectural based, so we went to college, so it wasn't really an apprenticeship from the outset. I think mainly because I wasn't encouraged in secondary school. I always loved woodwork, making stuff with my hands, and I always wanted to go down the apprenticeship road, but I was kind of discouraged from kind of school and kind of my parents a small bit, kind of like as if you shouldn't really do that. You should go to college, get your degree, and you get a job then. But then finally I found something I really enjoyed in college, so architecture. So it still is involved in apprenticeships in some way. And then just about kind of the experience over in Russia, it was just unreal. The scale of things over there is immense. I think if only for Ireland Skills Live last year, I don't think half the team would have done as good as they did this year. Because Ireland Skills Live basically brought everything under one roof, and we competed, and we've seen kind of somewhat of a scale of what it was like over in Russia. Without that, you would have just been struggling. You would have you would have been caught in the limelight. Just there's so much going on around you. But that kind of really kind of got you in the mindset. You know what you're expecting when you're going over there. And I think you should kind of put a lot of focus on that, because it does help students, and it does invite other colleges and secondary schools up to Ireland Skills Live to see apprentices and apprenticeships and the best people working in them skills.
Great. Thank you very much, Luke. And now I'm going to move to Ryan.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for inviting us also. As Luke said, our skill was building information modelling. So this is only a new skill. So this is classed under future skills. So over in the event, it was for 3 days, over 19.5 hours. And so, as Luke said, our background is actually in college. So, but I do see a potential for BIM to be an apprenticeship down the line. I think also that there is a skill shortage at the moment in the construction industry, so there needs to be a big emphasis on bringing people into the construction industry, also other apprentices. I'm kind of speaking from a selfish point of view here, but I think there just needs to be better kind of a roadmap so that students know that there is options out there. I think there is an emphasis to go to college, but I think that if people are, if the right kind of roadmap is in place, they'll know that it is a viable option and they can get a great career out of it. Because even just looking at who I'm surrounded by, like the apprenticeship, like they just show the immense, the level potential that you could have and represent your country. Like, it's not just about college. So I think just to really push the apprenticeship, get into the skill, invite people in to speak, and yeah, I just think more. I think even just looking at the Ireland Skills event this year, that was great success. So even to see all the students come in and walk around was great to see, because then you never know who could come along and just even sense a little bit of inspiration from what we were doing ourselves, and they might follow down that road as well. So I think to keep going with the Ireland Skills and just to really get the media involved as well. So yeah, that's
good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan, Ella.
Thanks for having us again. I suppose I represented Ireland in Brick Lane, so I started out in school. When I started in school, I didn't like school at all. It just didn't work with me. So, but when we were sort of doing the career guidance and that, just to answer some of the questions, apprenticeship was sort of looked down on. No one sort of spoke about it. When we were in the career guidance, we were given a big stack of books for all the colleges around the country, and all we were given was a leaflet on apprenticeships and what we could do. There was no sort of emphasis on trades or anything like that. And I did the norm. I filled out the CEO and applied for the colleges, but I just didn't want to do that. So I started out an apprenticeship and really enjoyed it. And I think a lot more people could do that, because when I registered, I was the first bricklayer since 2009 to register in Longford, Westmeath, I think it is. I was the first bricklayer since 2009, and I don't know of one since. So there's a massive shortage of bricklayers and things like that around the country, and I think there's a massive emphasis in schools put on higher options to go to see the colleges. I think there should be an emphasis put to go to Ireland Skills Live to see what apprenticeships are about and what people actually do in the trade, because no one actually can see what is actually done in each trade from just looking at a leaflet or just sort of researching it. I think you have to actually see it to see what it's about, and I think it should be more emphasised a good bit more. So, thank you.
Megan, you've told us a little bit about freight forwarding earlier. You might tell us maybe what attracted you to that as opposed to anything else, and of course respond to any of the questions.
Yeah, so I suppose I will address the couple of questions that were directed my way specifically, but to address your question there first, I suppose it's a question people love asking me because it is quite unusual, the industry I'm in, freight forwarding and logistics. My degree by title is Logistics and Supply Chain Management, and in third year I did my work placement with DHL, so I moved into the transport sector. I've also completed my CPC management exams as well at the end of second year. But what attracted me to the industry? I suppose it's like everybody that you meet in the industry. It's not particularly that I was attracted, I kind of ended up in it by default. I left, when I did my leaving cert, I was only 17. I considered myself quite young to be leaving school and deciding what I wanted to do moving on. So I took the initiative to take a year out. So I took a gap year and I worked for it. And in that time then I decided I would like to do a business course because that's the way I was kind of drawn towards. But in school I actually did all science subjects. I never completed a business subject to the leaving cert. So I was looking for a business subject that was a bit more kind of detailed, a bit more specific, as opposed to a broad business subject. And I just stumbled upon by chance the course in what was DIT at the time and is now TU Dublin. I did applied maths and higher level maths and really enjoyed them. So that kind of slightly drew me to the course with the spreadsheet modelling and the other maths subjects offered on it. But as you get into industry and the more business events I attend, you find that most people in the logistics industry have just stumbled into it. It's not kind of, you don't go through secondary school going, God, I know what I'm going to do when I leave school. I'm going to go into freight or transport or supply. But it's actually something that as I've attended events, and especially over the summer as I've met people, I've kind of started working a bit more on kind of telling my story. I have taken the time over the summer to write a blog. So I do go into kind of topics of why I chose freight forwarding, how I got into logistics, covering my world skills journey. So trying to share that story to try maybe inspire somebody else along the way that's looking for that little bit of inspiration. To tackle the question, mine isn't an apprenticeship. However, TU Dublin did launch the Logistics Associate Apprenticeship last year, which ran very successfully for its first year and is now running in its second year this year through TU Dublin, and is just launched in Cork this year as well, with quite significant high numbers. But again, to address another question that was thrown, the gender gap, which is quite a topical issue at the moment, especially in the industry itself. So again, I have sat in on some of the meetings for the apprenticeship programme, and again, it's quite a high proportion of male, and my class as well, my graduating class, there was 53 of us in the class and only 8 women. So you can see the gender divide. But what's quite interesting to note is at World Skills, it was 95% women to 5% male competitors in the competition. So you can see in Europe, obviously, there is a bigger emphasis on women in the industry. And again, noting the other competitors in my category, there was a higher percentage of apprentices than students in the competition. So obviously in Europe there is a bigger emphasis on the freight forwarding and that side of things in terms of apprenticeships. And to address another question that was put out about the school support at leaving cert level, I think honesty is the best policy here, and I will say there was no support given from our school when it came to leaving cert and other options afterwards. There was a career guidance kind of time set aside once a week, well, we were given time, but it was very much go in, use the computer lab and work on it yourself. So I think when I came to Leaving Cert level, I was very unsure. As I say, I was only 17. It's quite a big life decision to make at such a young age. So I did take that decision to take the year back to do further research, so I knew I was going into the right course. Many of my classmates went straight into college and dropped out within their first year, which would be quite normal. But I have to say, credit where credit's due, the push by Solace now and the Generation Apprenticeship launch, I think, is doing a fabulous job at the moment, and you're definitely starting to see it more across social media and reaching out to that younger generation. I think, as Ryan pointed out there is no support from the schools still. I think they're still struggling to get over. There is that image kind of problem at the moment. I think, as Luke was saying as well, like even parents will still discourage the apprenticeships because it was kind of always seen in Ireland as, right, apprenticeships are at one level and third level education was at another level, and that's the way the push was kind of done. But I definitely think there is a lot of positive work being done at the moment. I think it'll just take time to kind of build up that momentum. But I definitely think it has to be a case of going into schools and starting with the students. And I think it's starting at an earlier level, kind of the third year and TY and fifth year. Because I think starting at sixth year level, it's too late. You're asked to fill in, as you said there, Ryan, you're filling in your CAO in October, November, and you're filling it in for the sake of filling it in, just to get it done out of the way so you can focus on your Leaving Cert at that point. So I definitely think that's something to take into account moving forward, is kind of target the younger audience. And I know as well my younger brother is currently in sixth year, and again they were brought out to the Higher Options Conference, but there has been no push to bring them out to any of the Generation Apprentice events. So I think that's again something to encourage the schools to cast a wider net. There are the apprentice events out there, so there are the opportunities to bring them along. And even Ireland Skills Live does a great job at showcasing the apprenticeships. And I think ourselves show what you can achieve, whether it's an apprentice route or a third level education route. There are amazing opportunities. And even with the logistics apprenticeship, the content delivered is quite similar to the third level. So the opportunities are quite similar at the end of it, and there's huge scope for opportunity either path.
Thanks, Megan. Absolutely. It strikes me that really during TY that all young students should have the opportunity to go and do a taster session of a skill or apprentice and possibly learn a little bit more about the options through that. Hannah.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for inviting us. It is a huge honour, and especially considering that we were 17 going to Russia and 4 women, I'm extremely grateful to have the opportunity to be one of them. I can only speak for my own skill, and I do actually think there are a couple of things that need to be addressed in terms of cookery nationwide, worldwide. That's a whole other conversation, but especially for women. So me, myself, I didn't actually really decide to go into cookery. I also finished the Leaving Certificate, also took out a year. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Stumbled up on the 4-year Bachelor of Arts honours course in WIT then in Waterford. The fact that that attracted me to the course was that the third year is actually done abroad. So I have just come back from that. I was in a 1 Michelin-star restaurant in Budapest, and then in the Institut Paul Bocuse in France. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. But certainly I think one of the major issues in the industry that scares women off, but both genders, is the extreme toxicity, the long hours, the fact that you're always working when other people are off. That's a whole other conversation and something that needs to change within the job itself. I think women are really put off by the fact that going into kitchens, even having seen in Budapest and France, there is mostly kind of 80% men, 20% women. Head chefs are mostly men. Sous chefs are mostly men. As a woman, you have to go into a kitchen and kind of double prove yourself, whereas, you know, lifting heavy bags, things like that, that you can't do. If you ask anyone else to do it, you get looked down upon. So things like that, I think it's extremely unfair. I think the fact that apprenticeships also are not really encouraged. So my parents weren't really aware of the job I was going into, so they were very supportive. But I think certainly cookery, especially Ireland, hasn't put forward competitors for cookery in a very long time. So I'm one to go, I think, in 8 years now. And I think Ireland is a lot better than what we're putting forward. So I think you could definitely I think more funding could go towards cookery, towards publicising and advertising the fact that there are extremely good restaurants in the country. Our food is one of the best in Europe, and I think we should be showcasing that by sending more competitors over there. Another issue that I've seen is during training, also major thank you to Alan McCabe, who is not here today, who was my mentor. I think in terms of training for cookery, WITs, well, ITs are mostly the people doing the training for cookery. I mostly had people from ITs come in and train me, which was incredible. But I think younger members of the industry need to be involved too. So people who are actually out there working in industry need to be called upon to work together with the ITs to train the competitors, because having been over there, I think also competitors need to be warned of just the vast majority of people that will be out there. There were 46 competitors in my skill, and just the skills that they had, the skill sets that they had, the experience that they had, I think we could put more training into Irish competitors to, I suppose, compete against that, and I think we're well able for it, and I think we definitely should. And I think women also need to be more encouraged to go into kitchens in whatever way we can make it easier for them. I have absolutely no idea, but I do think that we could be doing much better.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm just thinking it's a shame this isn't a practical session here and you could have cooked dinner for a lot of us. It would be nice. And Pat, over to you.
I represent the construction network category. Came out with a medallion, luckily enough. In terms of secondary school, I would say how I actually came into the job. I wouldn't say the school, the career guidance would have helped him much. Like everyone is saying, it's college. Fill in CO just to fill it in. Where I was working somewhere job-wise, he offered me an apprenticeship, and that's how I got to learn about it. So the school didn't help at all, really. So thanks to Solus, to be fair, they gave good help. Any questions you had, you could just ring them up, and that was good. I also got support from Oireachtas and Oireachtas, being from Oireachtas, which is a great help as well. What helped me a lot over there in the Worlds was the lives competition. It was the simple thing like the crowds passing beside you. You're going to watch everyone that passes. So that helped over there as well, just to calm me down, got used to it a little more. I'm going a little blank now, of course.
But you enjoyed it anyway? And it was
I enjoyed it, all right.
different.
Yeah, I'm going to forget what questions he asked.
Yeah.
I might fill in later on.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Mark.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. I'm from Donegal originally. I started out secondary school and was just the same as everyone else has, come to leaving cert or no word apprenticeships. It was always something kind of going through school, I'd slight learning difficulties and that, and I wasn't very much into books and all that. And I was always very into the physical, the woodworking, metalwork and all that, but as everyone says, like there was go to college and go to universities and that, but there was nothing said about the apprenticeships. But I went on anyway, but problem from being from Donegal and kind of general rural Ireland is trying to get employers to do apprenticeship is a big problem there. A lot of them don't know what it is. A lot of them don't want to hear what it is because young fellows going away for weeks. They're just not interested in it, which is a big problem up with us. So got finally, after a while, I got an apprenticeship after going through the whole of Donegal, and I only could get one company and started out. And well, since then we've went from strength to strength. Got 3 years done now so far, and I represented Ireland in the joinery category and definitely enjoyed the whole thing. It was an unbelievable experience and definitely enjoyed it all. Thank you for having us here today.
You're welcome, Mark. And now I'm going to Chris, I think, is next over here. Yeah.
I can definitely say that I can't recommend apprenticeship enough. Definitely, it is amazing. But as Ireland's skills needs to be more addressed, it needs to be bigger. And definitely apprenticeship needs to start from primary school. Say, because you can leave secondary school at 16. So even a lot for me, even my dream started at primary school. So see, even for likes of posters, apprenticeships, it just needs to be up more. It has to be seen more. Do you know what I mean? So even then for Ireland Skills, schools come to Ireland Skills, they see Ireland Skills, and it'll give them the chance to do an apprenticeship. It'll give them an idea of what's going on. But then even on that focus, it'll make Ireland a stronger World Skills team, because it'll be a wider, there'll be more competition, there'll be more competitors. You know, it'll broaden us down into a way better team to go out and hopefully get more medals.
And what was your particular skill?
I was a welder.
Welder.
Yeah,
okay.
I done welding.
Good man. I saw a video, was it KWETV did, about a female welder. It was actually a really good piece, just to encourage women to get into that. Thanks, Chris. Adam.
My name is Adam Flynn. I competed in industrial mechanic millwright, which here in Ireland is called mechanical automation and maintenance fitting, which is our trade MAMF. Luckily enough, I had a brilliant engineering teacher in secondary school, which basically without her I wouldn't be here today. There was no focus whatsoever on apprentices. Basically, bar her, going into her class every week was literally the light at the end of the tunnel, really. Like, I hated school otherwise. I had a career guidance teacher. I couldn't say she was a help. Everything down to open days was focused towards ITs and universities, bringing you off out to the agricultural side, but there was absolutely nothing towards going down the apprenticeship road. What's to say they couldn't bring us out to an industry or even to a pharmaceutical plant for an open day. There was absolutely none of that, and basically I'd just like to see more of an emphasis on it from the secondary school side of things, because if it's not driven into you when you're younger, you're not going to bring it with you to this kind of level. Like, you're not going to get any further without someone guiding you in the right direction. And basically that's just kind of what I'd like to speak about.
Okay, thank you, Adam, for those observations. Jack.
Oh, my name's Jack Lynch. I competed in the cabinet making competition. In school, yeah, like the rest of them, a lot of the rest of them, apprenticeships weren't really pushed at all. It was all third level, and I got sucked into that, so I went to college. And now, coming through college, well, in third year, going into fourth year, I would have rather go down the apprenticeship route, but at the time in school, it wasn't really made. It didn't seem accessible to me. It kind of seemed a bit too complicated, a bit too not well enough advertised, just harder to get into than go to college. College was easy, it was just fill out the CO, away you go, there you go. Whereas the other things seemed a bit harder to me. And basically, yeah, that was it.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Well, look, it was very interesting to listen to all your experiences and your observations, and again, to congratulate you on behalf of all of us here, and to say that you are ambassadors in this area. So we'll be calling on you when we need to have more expertise and we need to have an input in relation to the whole apprenticeship area, because I think you've shone a light on where we need to go in relation to it. Ray, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points really. I think one is that we recognise the 17 who went, and indeed anybody who competed in the competition before, as a champion. And World Skills also recognised them as champions and gave them special pins marking that achievement from competitor to champion. And, you know, it's one of the things that we don't make enough use of that when they're back here. You know, why aren't we sending them out to second level schools? Why aren't we sending them other places and saying, look, for a couple of weeks, we're going to take you and send you around to second level schools where you can do some sort of a road show. And we really need to look at how we're going to develop that idea further on. Interesting, we've just started a conversation from World Skills in relation to something that the guys would have seen over in Kazan, which was the one school, one country. So where there's a link between a school in Kazan and a school, you know, with the team. And talking in general terms that were Mary Liz Trant recently and Sullis and Vivian Patterson from the HEA, we're looking at how we can translate that into a much bigger event with the Generation Apprentice, to one school, one country, to the team, and actually grow that dramatically within Ireland. And we're proposing that to the World Skills Board when they meet here very shortly in October. I think it's really interesting when you look at some of the questions about painting and decorating. Although we didn't have a competitor in it, 80% of the competitors were young females in Kazan, which is really interesting. Mostly European countries. But I think then I go back and I look at some of the results from Ireland Skills Live, where we 15,000 people attended and slightly more young women than young men turned. It was about 51 to 49, which is really interesting because it was aimed at skills, apprenticeships and undergraduate skills. And in particular on one of the days, although we really targeted the Saturday for parents and really weren't sure how it was going to work out, really interesting that we've seen a huge return of young people with their parents saying, that's what I want to do. So how are we going to move from an undergraduate into an apprenticeship? Really interesting. And I think then just to say as well that, you know, World Skills Ireland, there are 56 competitions. Some of them are new apprenticeships, so there is a changing demographic of the skills that we're involved in. But I think it's also interesting that Ireland promoted cloud computing as a competition, and it is now a World Skills competition. And we've promoted BIM as a competition, and it will be a full competition in Shanghai. So we're starting to use our own awareness of our own economic key factors and promote that to World Skills as competitions. But also there are new apprentices coming on board where when we build capacity, they will also become apprenticeships. I think it's really interesting, your comment on technical graphics. You know, that's a real lead into the BIM, as the guys there will tell you, and how it's not an apprenticeship is just beyond me at this stage, because there's a huge economic demand for it as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Ray. It would just seem that there needs to be a lot of educational awareness, not just for the students, but I think for the parents and for the schools in relation to the opportunities that are out there. And, you know, when we think about the world that's going to open up to us in terms of new jobs and new opportunities, and also the fact that and I think it was highlighted earlier on, I think it was by Ryan, in terms of the fact that we need interchangeability between courses as well too, because you can start off something and then possibly transfer over into a more niche area. But look, again, can I just congratulate you? I think you're all great ambassadors, and we will be back to you again. We look forward to hearing all about the conference that's going to be in October, and maybe if there's a possibility for some of us to attend, I think we'd like to do that. We're going to ask, and everybody is very welcome to take a photograph of all of you, because we want to do our bit to highlight your achievements and to spread the message out to the media outlets that it's really, really important what you've done, and your achievements, the fact that you're 10th in the world, like, that's quite incredible. And that is going to bring you a long way in terms of your future career opportunities as well. So again, thank you. Thank you to the volunteers and the mentors that were mentioned, and thanks to Nikki, who organised today as well too. So we'll see you just outside where we're going to take a very quick photograph, and then we'll be resuming back in private session because we have a huge amount of correspondence to get through.
I have another meeting to go to study reason from our parliamentary parties on.
Yeah. We'll deal with some of it. Donncha.
I want to Thomas then, but I was going to ask, did Mr. Brownlee want to respond to some of the points there just at the end as well?
Well, he didn't indicate, so I wasn't going to. Do you want to?
I can talk briefly. I know there were specific questions, Deputy. I suppose, yeah, just on the general promotion, yeah, it's using these guys as incredible ambassadors. I think, yeah, the mainstream media that maybe didn't cover them the way that we would want them to, but my God, they were stars on social media, and that's the type of stuff that gets traction with young people. And you know, I think we need to look at different ways to get the message across. I mean, we talked a lot about guidance. I don't think it's just about guidance. I actually think we need to look at how we develop vocational options and pathways in second level as well. I think the last time I was at this committee, there was a female apprentice who talked about the fact that she had to change schools because she didn't have the kind of the subject options that she needed to kind of pursue a vocational pathway. So we need to look at how the role of kind of FET can deliver those vocational options, vocational pathways, apprenticeship-type taster programmes in transition year or as part of the senior cycle and the junior cycle. So I think there's a lot of things to think about. Yeah, new apprenticeships are rolling up. I think we're targeting about 70 by the end of the year. I think the committee's looked at apprenticeship issues separately, and I'm sure you'll be coming back to that. And there are issues to be addressed. We need to get more employer buy-in. But I think we're kind of getting traction in terms of changing the culture and getting families and young people more interested in vocational options. It's not just about apprenticeships, it's about traineeships, it's about vocational degree programmes and IoTs, it's about PLC courses that lead to exciting careers. So there's so much opportunity there. I think we're pushing an open door if we can get the product right and we can promote it effectively. I mean, I think Ryan mentioned, you have prospectuses for higher ed. We give a leaflet for people interested in apprenticeship. So I think we need to package things a bit more, and I think that's a big challenge. And we've got a specific question on instrumentation and pharma. Like, there's new traineeships in that space, but I'd be happy to come back to you kind of individually and talk to you about the things that have been worked on in that. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure, Andrew. So we are going to go outside. We will be going back into private session. We may not deal with everything that's on the agenda because we have this much to get through after the photograph. but we'll get through some of it that we have to get through. So I'm going to suspend until 6 o'clock.